The motion was the table, since we voted on 50, the motion should be to table 51 and 22. Is that right?
Yes, that would be correct.
We have a motion to table policy 50 and 22 and seconded by 51, I'm sorry, 51 and 22 by Commissioner Macbeth, and seconded by, who seconded that?
I second.
And seconded by Commissioner Morai. And we voted on 50 already, so this is for 51 and 22. Does we have any discussion on that? If not, I'll call for the vote. All for the vote, say aye.
Aye.
Could you raise your hand?
Raise your hand so we can see. 4, all opposed?
Aye.
Aye. 5 to 4, the motion fails. So then we're going to go to the motion, the next motion we have by Commissioner Rain and seconded by Commissioner Howell. And that motion was to, and was it just policy 51?
51.
To approve 51 as presented by the committee, is that right, with the, as amended by the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Does anyone have any comments on that? Hearing none, I'll call for the motion. All for the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Show of hands for nay. Did you get that? 5 to 4. 5 to 4, that motion passes. Okay. Now let's go to policy 22 and bring it back to the commission for any discussion, or what is your favor on policy 22? Commissioner Capurro.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, first a little bit of, I'd like to make some comments here relative to some proposed changes. I agree with the idea that any of the changes should be substantial or material to be brought back and presented for approval by the Wildlife Commission. I do want us to emphasize, though, that many people expressed opposition to the plan going to the Commission for approval. That's already in the general order itself. So all this is saying is that any changes must be at least brought back to the Commission. I would agree to put in the word material changes if that were the situation. With regard to the big game release plan, I believe that language that would say that the Commission advised of any necessary or substantial changes if the source population the original source population can't be used. So that language would go into the big game release plan must include source populations.
Okay, would you go a little slower so I can write that down then?
So just to make the record clear, it appears that are you working off the original changes or the department's change?
No, I'm looking off the changes that were presented by the committee, which is the only official language that we're looking at right now.
I just want to make it clear, and so I can.
In the form of a motion, you're doing that?
No, he's just talking.
We're just talking, it's not a motion. Okay, what would you be your proposed changes to item number 6, was it?
Yes, on 6, that the big game release plan must include source populations of animals to be released, and the Commission advised of necessary or substantial changes. Must be advised of necessary or substantial changes.
Advised.
That would cover the idea that you may have to, because there might be a
advised of what? I couldn't make that.
Of any necessary or substantial changes.
Any necessary or substantial changes.
Somebody might want to use the word material. Well, all I'm saying is that covers the idea that if you had a die-off, if you had indicated a certain herd area that you were going to take from, the population there crashes. Obviously, you can't use that population. but we should be at least advised, because that's a change to the release plan. We should be at least advised that that's occurred. I have other comments to make. I don't know whether you want them now or not.
Yeah, let's have them now.
I've heard a common theme that it's expensive to control predators. I guess what my question is, how expensive is it to transplant sheep on a per head basis? What does it cost us to put sheep into an area? That's also substantial. And you take in, and I'm not even talking about because I've done this myself. I'm not even talking about the volunteer effort. I'm talking about the literal costs of net gunning and other issues that we have in translocating or transplanting populations. It makes no sense to me, and one of the issues that you brought up about the enclosure issue, to serve up a banquet to predators in an area which they are totally unfamiliar. We're releasing animals into an area that they have no idea where the escape routes are, where the water sources are, where the safe riparian areas are in general, and basically the lay of the land. I watched them run out of the trailer, went up to the nearest ridge, and start looking around. That first month is critical in the survival of those transplants. I cannot see, with the kind of money we put out for reintroducing, however you want to call it, augmenting or transplantation, that we spend that kind of money and not make sure that they have the best possible opportunity to survive. I've heard the arguments, well, they could die from disease and that too. Yeah, that's correct. They could. But if we save one of those sheep from a predator, something tells me that that kind of offsets some of the cost involved in putting them out there in the first place. I know there are other states that have this kind of policy. New Mexico, to the best of my belief, also has a policy where they will do predator control before and after reintroductions. I just don't think that the people of this state want to see animals put out there and we're told that, well, they'll either survive or they won't. I don't think we're doing our job if we don't make sure they have the best opportunity to survive. That pretty much covers my remarks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Commissioner Howe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was at the last CAB meeting in Clark County, there was a gentleman from Endow there, Pat Cummings, and he gave a good argument, I thought, for not having the ability to give us the exact source population for all these transplants. And I'm thinking that the language that Commissioner Kapoor just added to number 6, excuse me, is adequate. And I would just like to include where it says include source population. I would like to put proposed source population. And I see where Endow has put the word potential. I suppose it'd be about the same thing. But if they proposed or potential source populations, I think that'd be sufficient, with the addition of Commissioner Kapoor's words.
Okay. Let's get some other comments here and try to, Commissioner Macbeth.
Thank you, Chairman Lent. If we had issues with our transplant program, and if it wasn't so incredibly successful, it would seem to be more necessary to deal with some of these issues. But as it's been stated, we've got the most successful transplant program in North America. And after listening to Commissioner Capuro's statement and comment of, his position with respect to all the potential issues that occur in a transplant, it seems that we have are now dealing with the actual operational issues of the transplant. We have now weighed in on that as opposed to dealing with just the policy issues. And I think there's a line that's drawn between policy and operational, and by giving the department, by the commission giving a direction that predator control be considered in the transplant, I think that could be construed as a policy. But once we go past and require it, then what we've done is we've made a conclusion that it's it's necessary biologically, and I don't think that's our position.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one word that I did see that would probably be appropriate that was talked about when we had the public comment and would be in line number 5, where it's just a simple adding of "to" after presented. Plan must be presented to and approved by. That was in the thing sent by out by NDOW. That would probably be appropriate. Presented to and approved by. If I was, but and I do agree that a little bit of language in there in line 6, such as what just mentioned, which if I gathered it right was must include proposed source populations of animals to be released, and the commission must be advised of necessary or substantial changes. That was what I got. But, these transplants, not only are they very expensive, but they're exceedingly dangerous to the personnel that do them, and therefore we must do everything possible to make them succeed once they have been done. Yes, it's a successful program. Can it be made better? Yes. Should we rest on our laurels and say, it's good enough? We should do everything we can to ensure its further success and to make it more successful. I think everybody here today, whatever side of this particular yes or no will come up forward, everybody wants the same thing. Just about how we're getting to it. We all want this to be successful. I think every member of this commission wants these programs to be successful. I think it can be made better. We can do nothing and say, yes, it's good enough as it is, or we can do something and make it better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cavan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to my original comments that I never like to make decisions on things that are presented to me the same day. We went through the example earlier with Rob presented 5 options and the commission did not. I don't think we could have sorted it out, so we went with the option that was had already been presented. But I see some good language here that came from the department, especially on number 7, which we haven't really talked about much yet. But I think number 7 really gets into the operational end of what the department does, and the policy that is proposed is not broad enough to give them the flexibility to do their work. I did notice very clearly that in the proposed big game plan this year, release plan, that there were predator projects proposed, and I think it was, I can't say for sure, but I think it was probably a little more closely looked at this year than it has been in the past. But that's just a sense, not a so I still think that this stuff should be We should see final language. I think Darrell's proposed some great language, but I haven't been able to digest that language. And I know we're here to make decisions, and we can do that, but I personally would like to see it, this isn't a time-sensitive issue. I'd like to see it go back to get some language that we can sit down and digest a little bit and come up with the best possible language that we can. Thank you.
Hearing no other, Commissioner Howell?
Respectfully, I have to disagree with Mr. Cavan. It is time sensitive. We don't meet again until February. We've only got to get this started. We got to get it funded and get the work started. And as far as the predator, there was nothing mentioned about pre-augmentation predator control. It was all post-augmentation. And these changes that we're proposing here, I think it's very important to have pre-augmentation predator control.
Thank you. Commissioner Moore, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Commissioner Cavan that I know that from my perspective, I haven't had a chance. I've got notes all over these pages here of changes or ideas that different commissioners and public have had. An issue about the private property rights that was struck from this proposal, and in many cases, I think that might be an important issue, because I'm not thoroughly convinced that in all situations the affected parties are notified, and I'm certainly not in any way pointing the finger at whose responsibility it is and why it didn't get done. But I'm thinking in some cases it hasn't been done, and so I see that that's been stricken out of here because of possible legal issues, and maybe an important issue to try to bring back in here in a way that would fit the legal complications. So that we have Endow's proposal that, you know, is something that they feel that they could live with in here, and so we've gotten enough information just here at this meeting that the cabs haven't seen it. We haven't been able to absorb it, and there may be, I think we could do a better job if we tabled this.
Commissioner Wallace?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what Commissioner Morai just stated, and at the same time, I also agree with Mr. Howell. It's very important, but at the same time, it's just as important that we discuss it and we get it right as to just throw it on the table today, not have time for people to look at it, not have time for us to properly look at it and make a decision. I think it needs to go back to the committee with with all of these ideas and bring it back to us when it's in writing where we can see it. Because Mr. Capurro also had some good points that to sit here and try and write it down, I'm not exactly sure that I've got it in the right spot where he voiced it. And I'd like to see it in writing ahead of me before I make a vote on it. And it's just important to get it right as to do it. And that's my opinion. Thank you.
Since I'm going to be voting on this, I'm going to make my comments now. I'd like somebody to define, I keep hearing, we got the most successful program in the United States, and I agree with it. And, but I think this commission is trying to make it better, because we put sheep out and we lose them, we throw more sheep at them, because we've been able to do that because of the groups, the sheep groups that have helped us, and we just keep throwing it. But there's ways we can make it more successful, and I think that's what this commission's trying to do. I don't think this commission wants to hurt the transplant program. They want to see it go forward. As far as the property rights, you know, the department takes care of that. They do MOUs with the land agency. That's their job to set this up, and they do a job. They do a good job. If they don't do a job, then legally they should be sued or being taken to court. And from what I've seen, they always have MOUs, and some of them are being in controversy right now, but that's the department. They look after the property rights of the permittee or whatever's out there. If they don't do it, then there's some legal ramifications against them. And from a scientific data standpoint, I have with me a deer adult fawn ratios. And I'm talking about predator. I'm not out there to kill every predator out there, but there's a management tool that I don't think we're taking advantage of. I have deer adult fawn ratios that shows predator control produces a higher density of animals and therefore possibly increased hunting opportunities for sportsmen. The 4 areas we have the highest fawn ratios are where we're doing predator control with deer. And as long as the habitat's there. And this is going to be increased opportunities for sportsmen if we can increase our sheep or whatever it is. We can make it more successful. Many states have this policy where they do predator control before they do transplants. And I read scientific articles, and all the commissioners should, to keep updated. And in fact, I ordered this manual on the Northern Wind Wildlife Natural Resources Conference for every commissioner. And it's got all the different states and what they do. And I want to give you some examples. And I would hope the county boards educate themselves with some science instead of just listening to things. Because if you read stuff like this, you can see these papers that experts in the area of predator control and some of their reports. And I gave this to the all the commissioners, or the department did, so they could keep abreast of significant studies and technical papers pertaining to wildlife. And predator control is a tool that wildlife managers should be utilizing. And I'm just going to read a couple excerpts from that. And because the scientific literature supports many different management principles. Example, California versus Texas, and our director came from California, where it's outlawed. I'm talking about lions, but this for all of them. And I'm just highlighting a couple of, in a paper given by a New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, and they're talking about bounties and bounty hunters and how successful their program is. And they made a sentence here. It says, divergent management strategies are based on different societal values in these 2 states. And that's exactly what happened. Society in California banned it, and in Texas, they have a very successful predator and transplant program. Texas, they go into there, when they took our sheep, one of the things, they go in there and clean out the predators before they do any sheep to give them a big chance of survival. And that's their society says they can do it. So it's an issue that the different states have. And intensive mountain lion harvest in Texas has not resulted in the extirpation of mountain lions, and mountain lion distribution is considered to be similar today to what it was 35 years ago. And these are Department for Fish and Game specialists in this state. And it's just a different philosophical with the different states. And they've had good luck with what they're doing. And another one from Managing Predator-Prey Systems, summary discussions. And this Mark Boyce from Alberta, he's the one that did the wolf reintroduction plan in Yellowstone. And one of the sentences in the introduction is, predator control can be effective at enhancing survival and recruitment in populations of prey, but certain methods for controlling predators sometimes meet with fierce resistance from the public. And that's true. But they can be effective, but we meet fierce opposition from the public, and we've heard that today. But that's not science. I like to look at some of the science, and I would hope the county boards and anyone else involved would look at some of these scientific articles, the studies they're doing in New Mexico and Texas, and how effective they are. And there's some real good studies in Arizona. I mean, you know, sheep inside a fence, sheep outside the fence, and we've talked about this. But just to come up to us and say, well, you know, we don't like it, because we don't like any of the policies, you know, I mean, you know, we're trying to make something better, and I think this commission is, but you got to be knowledgeable of some of these studies in the States, how it's helped the sheep populations, any of their transplants. And I think that humans, as predators, we have a duty to control coyotes, mountain lions, and the other predators, and that we have a duty to do that. And that's what some of these papers say. And I look at from some knowledge from how some sexual programs are, and for somebody to come up and say it's going to hurt our sheep program, no one's told me one way how it's going to hurt them. Because I can tell you 10 ways how it's going to help. And how it's going to hurt them financially, let me give you a solution. They can ask for heritage money to do this. There's a lot of different ways we can get the money to do it. That's just one solution. There's a lot of different ways we can do if it's a funding deal, but we want to give these animals a chance. And I've seen transplants go bad, Mount Grant, Tule Mountain out here, and they didn't have to go bad if we would have did the predators. Wildlife Services, if you've read one of their issues, the last remaining sheep was holed up in a cave, and lion tracks were going around and around it for a week just waiting, and they're so scared to get, and they disappeared from the face of the earth. So we did another transplant, and we're just making lion food. And I think we need a little more science in it, and that's why I asked Cox from the department in Vegas, do you do that? And he says, no, we chase the predators. We put the sheep, and the predators chase them where they might be. Well, we just had a speaker in Lovelock tell us that when you chase animals out of their natural habitat up to the higher elevation, because the predators, the lions, are in there, and you alter their whole ecosystem. And they don't breed right, and that's why you have reduction of young. And so it's a real complex system, and predators can change the whole system on it. And if you look at some of these papers, and that's why I had him come to the meeting, and I've got some other guys that are successful, like in New Mexico and some of the other states. I'd like to come to meetings and try to educate the cabs on some of these things that other states are doing in an effort to make this state better. And, you know, I don't know, you know, all of our biologists, you know, the biologists in one state, you know, like California fight with New Mexico, and it's just a different sociological issue. And I don't want to see the sportsmen in this state get so lined up with just binders that they don't listen to how the other states are doing. And that's why this commission, and that's why I got this book for them, you got to keep abreast of these things. And we're going to talk about sending somebody to WAFA, and we learn about these things from these meetings, and we get updated. And I like to bring speakers in that are code experts on predator management and even sheep transplants and stuff to educate. I'm not saying our department, but you can always use a different perspective, a second opinion. And I'm hoping the calves and the sportsmen out there, even the sheep people, will respect that and like it. There's a big controversy on disease, domestic versus wild sheep. Big controversy on it. And you know, we got some vets here that say, oh, absolutely, you know, wild sheep are affected by domestic sheep, and the domestic, that's bullcrap. And so there's a lot of issues going on there that, you know, that come to the commission, and you've got to look outside Nevada, some scientific stuff to see what other people have to say, and we got to put it together. We got to digest this. And, you know, this went out to the boards, and I don't know why, you know, we can't, you know, I wrote it down, and the commission must be advised of any. I wrote down one sentence, and it's right in front of me, and I like some of those ideas, but I'd like to make sure the department can live with these. We certainly don't want to do anything with that, and I think when somebody says we're going to bankrupt the sheep program, I get very offended by that, because that is absolutely not true. And if you can tell me I was going to bankrupt the sheep program, then they should have said it when they came up here. And I think we're trying to do a better survival. We're trying to get more sheep on the mountain, a higher survival rate, and more opportunity for sportsmen. That's where I come from as a sportsman's rep, because I'm knowledgeable. I try to keep up. Can't keep up in everything, but I try to do some homework before, and I hope the cabs aren't just taking it from one biologist. They're looking at it from a scientific standpoint, because that's where I'm looking from. And I've got some studies to back up how effective pre and post predator management before you do transplant, how effective it is in other states. And for somebody to tell me it's not effective, they're not doing their homework. Absolutely aren't doing their homework. And so I state my position here because I'm going to be voting on this. Typically I wouldn't, but that's my feelings on this for the rest of the members of this body.
Mr.
Anybody
Chairman,
else? Oh,
excuse me, maybe we should make a comment from the department's perspective. Ken Mayer for the record. First of all, I guess I'm a little troubled with some of the conversation that's been going on that intimates that the department is against predator control, and that's absolutely not correct. I think our record shows that we have been very active in that, maybe not as active as some people would want us to be, but we have to take a biological approach to this, not an emotional approach to it. So I just want to make that clear for the record. We have an ongoing process since I've been here. I don't know what happened prior, but on these trap and transplant projects, we have a process in place to evaluate predation and the effects of predation on those release sites. And you'll see if you go back to the sheets in the plan that you saw in Vegas, that we have projects that we have identified where we want to do predator control, and we will follow through with that. And I don't disagree with what Mr. Lent said, that pre and post works, but not everywhere. And that's the problem that we have. What you're doing, it'd be mandating that every capture we do pre and post. And we don't think that's necessary. We think we should do a biological analysis of each one of these releases and do what's necessary. And that's what we're proposing. You need to understand, when you vote for this, if you're going to vote for the language that's been originally proposed, you will effectively cancel the trap and transplant program for this year, because what you're going to be asked to vote on here in a few minutes is a trap and transplant program that does not have what you're asking for here, a mandatory pre and post predator control. First of all, it's not been funded, it's not been budgeted. The heritage process doesn't start till May of next year. So I don't know any way to be able to live up to what you're asking us to do this fiscal year, for sure. On advice from my counsel is that we also think that you may have overstepped your statutory authority here. And what I would ask is that whatever votes you do take, affirmative, that the two DAGs get together and take a look at this. And if there's agreement, fine. If there's not agreement, I guess we might take the opportunity to go back to all the commission policies. And this is something that's interesting that I took the lead actually from Mr. Lent before you were on the commission, that we need to look at all these policies and make sure that over the years that mission creep hasn't moved from the operation of the department to the commission, and we need to make sure that we're doing that. What we'll probably have to do is go back to look at all those commission policies and see and make an actual AG request to take an official look at these to make sure that we're in the right seat, whether it's operations or policy. But I think you need to understand that at this point, if you approve the change, I don't see how we could move forward this year with living up to what you're asking us to do.
You've got a reserve fund, you've got interfinance.
You don't, and that's not being a fiscal manager if you just dip into the reserves. That's not what the reserves are for. And we made payroll in last March by $3. Okay, $3. I told them that I'd write a check so we have furloughs that are ongoing. This is a way more complicated deal. But if I had dipped into the reserve for a significant amount of money, we would not have made payroll in March. So this is, you're trying to estimate what things are going to cost. It's a nightmare. So if this was something that we were forced to do, we would have to put that all into the machinery of planning financially for it, and that, in fact, the trap and transplant proposal for the heritage would include requested money to do the predator control pre and post, or to the predator committee. But that's the way the process works. So anyway.
I guess since the legality of it's being questioned, My current feeling is that Section 7 is very close to the line that the commission is allowed to go up to. And I'm not certain it's not over the line, frankly. But it's not clear enough that I think I can tell you that you can't do it as a matter of law. And so that's why I really haven't said anything yet. So I would agree that that's close to the line. Whether it's over it or not, I'm not prepared to say today. So just for what it's worth, that's my input.
I know in other states, the commissions have made these policies, and I looked at it from that standpoint also. And operations is how you do it, and you know, this is broad policy if it's going to be to save our sheep. I consider it a policy decision, so that's why I'm comfortable with it, and whatever you want to do to challenge it is fine. Anyone else have any comments? Commissioner Macbeth?
Getting back to what Dag Stockton said, I guess when I look at 7, I ask myself, you know, with a mandatory requirement for predator control, doesn't the determination of predator control fall in the operational and biological side of the line automatically? I can't see how that is not operational. I just don't see it, and so I would have to say that it is fairly clear to me that this number 7 steps over the line.
Commissioner Rain?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite comfortable with number 7, and due to the fact that it not being operational, due to the fact that it does not specify the exact details. It is a broad, encompassing statement. It does not say you will go in for 6 months, 2 days, and 3 weeks before, and you will spend $20,000 on this project and 10 on another. It is not specific. This simply gives direction, and under this direction, NDOW would therefore have to carry it out, but it leaves broad scope for them to carry it out under. And therefore, I'd like to move to approve policy 22 changes as proposed by the committee with the corrections of line 5 to the last sentence of that last line to read, plan must be presented to, addition of to, and approved by the wildlife, and approved by the Wildlife Commission. Simply the addition of this word to. Line 6, big game release plan must includes, and then put proposed, so it reads must include proposed source populations of animals to be released, as was proposed, with the addition of, and the commission must be advised of necessary or substantial changes, period.
Just a second, let me get this down.
Essentially, it was read earlier.
Okay, that was a motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Do it. Before we discuss, I need a second.
Just, this is a question on the motion.
Is the motion done? I think you need to finish the motion.
That was all the changes. Yes, that was it.
And 12 was deleted.
And 12, well, and 12 was deleted as happened yesterday, yes.
But there was no vote, so.
No, okay.
There was no vote.
Ending at item 11, no 12.
Before we discuss it, I need a second.
I'll second.
Commissioner Kobrin seconded. Now we can discuss the motion. Commissioner Capur.
Mr. Chairman, would Vice Chairman Scott Rain agree to put the term material changes in item 5?
I'd not written that down.
Line 1.
Yeah.
What, say that again?
Once approved by the commission, any material changes in the big game release plan must be presented to and approved by the commission.
That would be acceptable to the maker of the motion.
Yes, it is acceptable.
Is that okay with the second?
Yes.
Okay. Those are the changes. We have a motion and a second. Let's discuss it now. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Kevin.
I think we need to have Ken give us I think he was pretty clear, but we can't go forward with the big game trap and transplant program if this policy passes today. Is that?
Well, you're going to, here in item 16, which is next, we gave you an overview of the plan, pretty detailed overview of the plan in Las Vegas, and now you're going to be asked to approve it. That does not have predator control in every one of those releases. And we're going to be doing, part of that's an evaluation. It's not a mandatory predator control.
But
So
this would be in directly contrary to what's going to be presented for our approval in the next
You
item.
could approve and I hope you would, the biennial big game release plan, but then I'm not sure how we would go about implementing it, given the changes in number 7. Because it's not planned for, it's not funded. You know, there's a lot of things that go into that. So,
Well, personally, I think we have to go back and do some rewording and postpone this. That's just my position.
Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Wallace?
I'm going to bring one up that was discussed earlier. The motion was as presented, and we still have on the front page the act of releasing endemic wildlife species in the habitat not currently occupied. Now, does that mean that if there's not something there now, we can't transplant anything there in the future? Is that what we're trying to do? Is that?
Commissioner Rain?
I think that could be, it was discussed in the committee, thank you, Mr. Chairman, was under, that would be reestablishment. That crossed under reestablishment. That is clearly covered under reestablishment. Reestablishment would cover that.
Yeah, reestablishment and transplanters. Those fine there. Hearing no other comments, I'll call for the motion. Let me reread the motion to make sure everybody understands it. The motion was approve policy 22 as amended with the following amendments. Number 5, once approved by the commission, any material changes in the big game release plan must be presented to and approved by the Wildlife Commission. Number 6, the big game release plan must include proposed source population of animals to be released, and the commission must be advised of any necessary or substantial changes. And number 12 was to be deleted. Is that what the motion, does that sound?
Yes.
Okay, that's what the motion is. Does everybody understand the motion? I'm going to call for the vote on the motion. All for the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Raise your hands. All against the motion, say nay.
Nay.
We have 4 opposed and 5 for, then the motion carries. Thank you. Next item of business is